Hi, my name is Andrew McLaren, and today we're going to be talking about claim evidence reasoning, also known as CER. And I want to show you a progression that you can do from 6th through 8th grade with very similar rubrics that have a similar layout, but harder expectations at 8th grade and easier at like 6th grade. So we're going to look at a couple templates and examples. This is based off of my CER rubric that I've made in the past, and I have like a whole hour-long video talking about my history with CER and how I got to that. This is kind of an updated version after going to a conference and seeing how people were talking about some of the evidence statements and how they were using them to make some assessments. So I've tweaked what I do here slightly, so it's a little bit different and I like it quite a bit, but it's also a little bit more complicated. So we'll get into it. Okay. When I do CERs, there's three main components. There's the claim, evidence, and reasoning. They need to each be done on their own slide, mostly because the evidence and reasoning for students gets kind of blurry as to which part is evidence and which part is reasoning. And we need to separate them physically to help them mentally be able to see how they're different. It's really, really important. I've done this for a couple years, and that's one of the biggest pieces with claim evidence reasoning is just being able to correctly identify evidence as evidence and reasoning as reasoning. Like there's a lot of ideas in reasoning that people will try and use as evidence, and that's not a scientific argument. You need to have data. So that's a big part of my 6th grade emphasis is knowing the difference between evidence and reasoning. I do that with some specific requirements in different parts. So they'll be like, oh, like an idea, a key concept that shouldn't be going in evidence because I'm getting graded on key concepts being in the reasoning section, right? So there's some expectations that help them understand how these things are separate and different. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go into in depth with 6th grade. But each grade is going to have a very similar layout and similar expectations. The rubric should even be pretty similar in terms of the overall structure, like the amount of points that you can get and the different categories that you're using. Then like my reasoning expectations and my evidence expectations kind of change. So like at like 7th grade, they're going to be having to use stronger evidence. And I've kind of showed these multiple colors because in the evidence there's multiple sections that I kind of color code as requirements. And that I'm going to do in 7th grade and introduce that level of detail, that strength of evidence at 7th grade. And then the 8th grade is more about being able to pick a claim and prove why that one's right as well as other ones are wrong. And then also I wanted to kind of tie in the cross-cutting concepts and put that in the reasoning so they're able to talk about like scale or patterns or something like that, like a big picture idea, as well as these specific to the unit ideas, these key concepts. So we're going to be tying like in the big picture at 8th grade and trying to actually kind of engage in argumentation against some other claims, which is kind of a higher order thing. So let's dive into it, and I'll start with 6th grade. Yeah. The main thing for 6th graders is that they are able to separate evidence and reasoning and identify the two correctly. So, what I would do for this is kind of really emphasize that evidence is things that you're going to see. This is like data. And then reasoning, these are like ideas or concepts in our head or ways of thinking about things or relating um, different concepts together. So that's going to be really important. But the reasoning here, kids will oftentimes be like, but like plate tectonics, that's something that exists in the real world. But it's the idea of plate tectonics is in our head. We can do actual observations of the fault lines, and that can tell us with good evidence that that indicates that there's plate tectonics and that's what's going on. But we don't actually physically see plates and all of them moving and how they all move. That's something that we're able to model and figure out what that looks like through evidence and what we're seeing in the real world. So, what I was thinking about for this was that you could really kind of interchange qualitative and quantitative evidence at this stage. Some teachers may choose that they want those to be separate. I think that the main thing for 6th grade for me is that evidence and reasoning are correctly identified. And this is like a secondary goal that some teachers may choose to emphasize, or you could hold off doing that till 7th grade and really separate out like much stronger quantitative measurements than just qualitative. and helping them require that level of detail when it's given. So that's something that you could kind of hold off, but you might choose to include that. But for my rubric, I did not include the color coding. I just was saying evidence is evidence. It's okay if it's qualitative when I give them quantitative data for sixth grade only. So I also recommend you give them some cards so that they are able to see the pieces of evidence that they've learned throughout the unit. And then for like the final writing, they've got like maybe 10 cards and like six of them are actually relevant. So they have to pick which ones to use. And there's probably gonna be somewhat evidence for a different claim from the unit, but it just doesn't really apply for the claim that you're actually writing at that point in time. And then reasoning, this could be some sort of key concept that they have already like on the wall or some sort of list, maybe in their binder or in their interactive notebook or whatever. So these are like the main ideas that they've been learning throughout the unit. And I'd like to kind of highlight those, and you'll see why it kind of goes with my color coordinating later. So like the main big picture concepts are going to be highlighted. If you've seen my previous video, I did vocab words. It's kind of interchange with that. Vocab words to key concepts. Then they're going to kind of work in groups, figure out what evidence is relevant, what key concepts are relevant, get those cards together as kind of scaffolding the writing. So now that they've got the pieces of information, they just need to turn those into like paragraphs. And I really want to emphasize this last piece. This is super important and this is important for all the grade levels. So make sure you've talked as a team about this and also with the language arts social studies teachers. The evidence that we use in science is different than an evidence that's used in language arts or history. In history, they might talk about like a primary source or a secondary source, like someone writing about an event happening. Scientists do not consider that evidence. That's just like a documented, recorded thing that someone saw. Real evidence has to be something that I can recreate or go there myself and observe what they observed. So we need to, like, if you were trying to prove that some sort of battle happened, you need to go to that site of the battle and like dig up some relics and artifacts to show that that thing actually happened there. I wouldn't take someone's word about some battle happening or someone winning some battle unless I can verify it with some sort of real observations in the real world, some evidence in the real world, not something that came from another person. So this is really important for having students understand what makes a scientific argument special, and it's that it can be verified, completely verified all the way through by other humans. Sometimes it's a little expensive, but it should be something that can be done with the claim that you're making. So this is different than when people like in language arts, they might call this ACE or RACE for the writing, where it's answering a question, citing, and then explaining. And so that cite, when they're talking about someone and their primary or secondary source, that's very similar to what we're using for our evidence section. Like claim is kind of like answer, evidence is kind of like cite, and reasoning is kind of like explain for the ACE one. And I think race is the same thing, it's just restate for R. So it's a very similar format, but it's important to highlight the difference. And then when the teachers in language arts are doing their ACE, they should be asking their students, is this evidence scientific evidence or is this evidence that we use as historians? Because those are different criteria. Okay. So if we then want to see a template of this, then we've got basically, I've got the claim. They will be given some evidence cards, which they should write down what evidence card they're using and then summarize what that evidence is. And then they should be picking some key concepts, including, I think I said 2 or more here. And then you would list out the key concepts for them. And I've got some other things to kind of help them remember what CER is and sentence frames to kind of get them going, and my expectations around like highlighting key concepts. And then I've got the actual rubric. This is what I would use. Kind of, I would put this in Google Classroom, and in my other CER video, I kind of go in depth on how to do that. So I'm not going to do that here. But you can see here I'm requiring, again, at least 2 of our key concepts. So there's a certain requirement there. And then the evidence, there needs to be 2 different pieces of evidence from 2 different sources. That's important for me, that these evidence is like coming from like different sources. It's not just all from one person, right? So that's a requirement that I'm going to include. And that's basically the same sort of format for the other grades with like strong, good, weak, and missing, but these exact criteria in here are going to be slightly tweaked for what we're trying to focus on there. So if you were looking at 6th grade, these are the ones that I taught when I was in Oregon for 6th grade. And you can see these performance expectations. And I've picked one right here. And I just kind of wanted to show you this evidence statement and how I've used that with my rubric to kind of fill in the rubric. So if you look at this evidence statement for this individual performance expectation, there's all these parts here, and they'll tell you like, okay, there's a claim, and then there's an evidence section, and then evaluating the evidence and reasoning. So this very closely lines up with what I'm doing. Um, this evaluating piece, I save more for like the 7th grade, 8th grade rubric. That's not so much in the 6th grade for me. But you can see that I'm having them make claims. And then there's these like 4 different categories for the evidence, the types of evidence that they might use. These are very much like your evidence cards. So your evidence cards should line up with these 4 things, right? So that's important. And then also there's reasoning. These are like different parts of the reasoning. So these are all required like key concepts for reasoning. So it's a requirement that they're kind of hitting 3 key concepts, or at least 2 of those 3. And then I think I'd said that they needed to use at least 2 different pieces of evidence here. You might want to include more. It kind of is up to the teacher about how many pieces they expect. If you're really going by the standard, though, I would say require all 4 and all 3. And that's like up to the level that they should be at. But again, if I'm doing this with 6th graders, I kind of know that I'm going to need to adjust my expectations a little bit, and focus on just, is this evidence, is this reasoning, are they appropriate? And we'll make these complete CERs stronger over the next 3 years. So you can kind of see that I've got the claim here. You might write this as a class, or it could be given. Sometimes students have a hard time writing their own claim, especially for the first science. So you might want to do some kind of silly examples. I've got some examples of that in the other video that I did on CER. But this is definitely something that they should be able to do on their own by 7th grade and 8th grade. Then these are like evidence cards. I pull these directly from those evidence statements. Like the specialized groups of cells, tissues are found in each organ, organs work together. So there should be some sort of evidence card here. They're going to need to summarize the information that's on that card in their own words, right? And then they're going to need to write some reasoning using 2 of these key concepts. Now they can't just do like bullet point key concept 1, bullet point key concept 2. They have to write a couple sentences using those key concepts and saying how they're related to the claim. So like you might give them these 3 and say, okay, now you got to pick 2 of these and explain how those relate back to this claim and your evidence, and do that in here. But make sure you've labeled the key concepts. And for me, I would make sure that they don't write the evidence again in here. The evidence needs to get written above there, but then they can refer to it so they can see, as we saw in evidence card A, and then they would kind of explain the key concept that's related to that, so that they're just correctly identifying evidence is here and the reasoning is here, and they're different because of that, right? I think I should not have to highlight the terms. I think that was for when I used to require vocab, so that should not be there. There's a lot going on here, so you can kind of see that. Again, this is the stuff that I would kind of give students just as a reference. And then, yeah, I think I tweaked this to say use all 3 of our key concepts. And then I would say that you should probably require all 4 things from like 4 different sources, because there was those 4 evidence cards at least that you would provide for the students for this prompt. You probably would want to give some evidence that's not appropriate as well as the ones that are useful. But yeah, that's the main idea with 6th grade. We'll do 7th grade next. So the main thing for 7th grade is that this is where evidence gets stronger and more detailed, and they really understand what makes scientific evidence better than just regular evidence that you would use in an everyday argument. The main thing here is that like 6th graders, they probably were required to do some sort of observation, but now if there's numbers that are given, they need to use those numbers in their CER. They can't just say, oh, the plants got taller. They have to tell you how much taller they got in what amount of time, right? So there's some measurements that are done. They should be reporting those measurements out when they're doing their CER. That's important to me. Also, it's really important that they're kind of evaluating their source, at least on a surface level, looking at who is giving this information and also how they got it. So if they can't tell me how this data was collected, then I don't think the student really understands the full argument of what they're talking about. So like if they're talking about climate change and they don't understand what an ice core sample is and how it is collected, then how is it evidence for the atmosphere changing over time? You see what I mean? Like they do need to have some level understanding of what is being collected and how to be able to correctly relate that to the reasoning and use that as evidence. So you could use some old assignments here. I was also thinking like, do you want to give students the evidence cards or make them get evidence from old assignments that they've done in the unit? And you could use cards that are given to them and do like a card sort, or maybe start the year with some of those, but then start to get rid of some of that scaffolding so that they're looking at their old assignments. And by the end goal is that they're able to pull evidence from old assignments and get their own evidence like that without having all this stuff kind of laid out and labeled for them. But I might even kind of color coordinate some of the stuff in the assignments. So like the source I'll put in light blue for them. So they'll kind of see that while they're going through it and be like, oh, there's my source. That's that color. That's that information, what color that information is, right? So you can kind of guide them a little bit with the color coordination to help them identify procedures in assignments or observations that they got in an assignment or they saw in a reading or something like that, so that you can kind of guide them a little bit, but get rid of some of the scaffolding. So this is very similar to what I've done kind of in the past with CER. They need to include all 4 of these colors when they're given, and they should have some sort of assignment or title in here so we know where this came from. And then their reasoning, again, similar to the 6th grade, there's going to be key concepts. We're not highlighting terms. That was when I did vocab. So it's all about these key concepts, and you would list them out for them. And very similar to what I did with 6th grade, I give them a couple of reminders about this stuff. This is just scaffolding to help them with the writing that they would do on these 3 slides. So for each grade level, they're only really doing 3 slides, but there's oftentimes more given to them as support, including like this rubric written out like this. So you can see that I have my color requirements here. And if they're missing numbers or units, that's going to bump them down to like a good instead of a strong piece of evidence. And then here I'm using, yeah, like three key concepts, I think. Of course, there's going to be some situations where there's more than 3, so you might have to have there be like 5 or 6. I think that's what we've got in our example here. So I picked, these are like the PEs that have things around writing, like practice 6, 7, and 8 are all about argumentation and writing. And so I picked this one right here where we're looking at photosynthesis. This is one of the ones that I actually have done with my students with a very similar rubric, but slightly different. I think when I did this with students, it was we were looking at key vocab, like words, not key concepts, but it was very, very similar to what I'm talking about in terms of expectations with everything else. So you can see here, same sort of idea where they've got some evidence and they've got some reasoning and there's some requirements around what they should be including, right? So you can see how this is going to be like evidence cards and key concepts. So these things are kind of structured for you. Like I saw someone saying that the lower down on the evidence stance, the more difficult it is. I kind of see what they're saying. I think that you still need to get down to this reasoning part here. Um, like everyone needs to get down there. This isn't like something for the tag students. Um, but it is going to be kind of a higher order thinking to do reasoning than just to say what the evidence is. But I do think that everyone should get down and do that requirement for like CERs, you know? So you can kind of see I've got my claim. It's all around that prompt around photosynthesis causes cycling of matter, right, in an ecosystem. So I've just made it a little bit more kid friendly. So they write a claim. And then there's going to be some sort of assignments or experiments that we've done. I did something with photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and then ecology models previously. And then I was looking at what they have here for their evidence requirements. And like 1 and 2, if you read those, that's basically what you would get from an assignment or a lab with photosynthesis. And then you're going to have some stuff about cellular respiration, which is kind of like this guy right here, about animals needing the food and oxygen to provide energy, that's cellular respiration. And then this is around like the ecosystem piece, right? That part, fourth part. So you can kind of see that the evidence that you're going to use here is heavily informed by the evidence that they're requiring in the NGSS standard, um, be they evidence cards or pieces of information from an assignment. And then same sort of deal, they need to get their key concepts. I think there was 5 of them here. And so I required, I think, 5 key concepts on this rubric, or at least 4 of the 5. Yeah. So you can kind of get the idea that they're going to need to use a fair amount of these topic ideas. So this reasoning is probably going to be long, but then they're going to be able to say like, oh, in the photosynthesis lab, we saw this color change, which is indicating the plant was breathing during night instead of doing photosynthesis. It was kind of doing the opposite, right? So they were able to pull in some uh, evidence to talk about how plants will sometimes take in oxygen or give off oxygen to produce these carbon-based compounds. So you can kind of see how that's related. So yeah, I think that that's for all of it for 7th grade. Let's do 8th. For my 8th grade expectations, this is pretty tricky, but I believe that if you've done the 6th grade and 7th grade expectations with students and they've gotten to that point where they're able to have strong evidence, strong reasoning, and they're able to correctly identify those two, then it's like, what do you need to do with CER beyond that? You're kind of at the level. And I've seen people talking about, well, now instead of being able to just make a claim, you need to be able to engage in some sort of argument against another claim. And so they need to be looking at like 2 or more claims and say which one makes sense and why does the other one not make sense. So there's kind of like multiple things they're going to need to be talking about in their CER. In addition, I was looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, we're doing key concepts in here, but what about the cross-cutting concepts? So we can identify those from the NGSS and require them to talk about scale or patterns or something like that. And so if we look, this is very, very similar to what I've done in the past, but now there might be some claims here and they may need to make a claim and then do another claim that they prove wrong. Or you could list them out here. It's kind of like depends on the teacher and how late you are in the year. You might have them make claims later in the year and give them a list, and they pick one to prove and others to disprove early on. But if you have them make claims, you might want to give them like certain words to include to make sure the claims kind of stay in the same topic area, you know? But those are going to be harder to grade when they're making their own claims. It'll be easier to grade when you have it with the ones that you like pick from this because I kind of know what to look for now, right? So the evidence requirements are basically the same as 7th grade. They got to do all 4 of those components, and they got to do that for a couple different pieces of evidence. And they're gonna need to do key concepts on here as well as a cross-cutting concept. So okay, that's fixed now. I had it fixed on the actual example, but not in the template. So they should be including the cross-cutting concept as well as the key concepts. And so you list those out for them, and they're gonna have to use that. And same thing as the last one, they've got scaffolding to help them with the writing. Just some reminders of how you do color coordination, like how you change the colors of the letters and how you like highlight. So I just put like those images in there just to give them a little reminder. And then very similar to the last one, but now we've added in the cross-cutting concept requirement here, as well as the fact that they need to prove the second claim wrong. And so there should be um, two claims. Let me just tweak this real quick. Actually, no, I'm happy with that. I was trying to think about changing the wording here, but I think we do want one claim that's answering the question that doesn't include evidence reasoning, and the second claim being proven wrong is kind of down here. I suppose you could include some sort of requirement about there being two claims, one you're proving and disproving in here, but it's kind of down there as well. So that's kind of good there. And then if we look at the actual example, we can look, this is a couple 8th grade standards that are all about argumentation or valuing evidence or something like that. And so you can see we've got one about gravity and its interactions being attractive depending on masses of the interacting objects. And so if we look at that evidence statement, it's very, very similar. It seems to me that 6, 7, and 8 tend to have something where there's evidence and reasoning in the requirements. Even if it's like practice 6 versus 8, they tend to have these. So you can see that we did like argumentation from evidence here, and earlier we did like a completely different evidence statement. I believe constructing explanations, designing solutions. Yeah, so that's a different practice, but they still have evidence and reasoning in them. So it seems that 6, 7, and 8 tend to have CER kind of in the requirements. So just something to keep in mind. But then if we're talking about the gravity one here, you can see like, oh yeah, I've got some evidence, identifying the evidence, right? And then also evaluating it. So this piece is kind of taken care of by my evaluating the sources. And then these might be like the pieces of evidence that they're required to talk about. And then also the key concepts are right there. And then if you're looking for the cross-cutting concept, it's all about system and system models for this one NGSS standard. So if we look way back and we go down to that, sorry, that was a lot. Yeah, we're right here. So we can say like you got to do some sort of claim around gravity, massive object, and force. They should be doing one that they're proving and one that they're going to disprove. So they're going to say like this is correct, this is not correct, right? And then they'll have their observations and numbers. There should be numbers in here as well. I'm not sure why that got dropped, but that should have like that orange as well. Then we'll have the these are required in the reasoning. So they've got 3 key concepts and 1 cross-cutting concept, and I think they should include all of that to do a good job. So yeah, I think I required use all 3 key concepts here and the cross-cutting concept to explain our reasoning, and then they also need to prove why the other claim is wrong or explain why they think it's wrong. So yeah, that's my progression. It's a lot. Each one of these for each grade level, I'd say is probably going to take a period or longer, depending on the student. But if you're doing equitable grading where the students can resubmit these assignments, that really, really helps them have long-term success throughout the whole year. Because you're going to also have to spend a long time grading these. Just know that you're going to have to put some time into giving feedback on these, but then students will make tremendous growth across the years as well as within the year if you have the structure set up this way. Now, I've only really done this like at a single grade level. I haven't had like the whole coordination between the different grade levels to do this all the way through, but I have taught all of these grade levels and done CER with them. So I've got some level of understanding what students can do. And like I know my 7th graders when they left, they're like, we've got CER down. We can do this to your expectation. we're ready for the next step, right? So I'm kind of thinking about like, I wouldn't want them to do the exact same thing as what they're leaving that year being able to do, right? We always want to be able to get better. So yeah, let me know what you think. Um, I'm always happy to collaborate with people and to hear what their thoughts are around CER as well. Um, the main thing on this is that reasoning is not just an explanation of evidence. It has key concepts, like big picture ideas in there. And that's very, very important to me. I've seen some curriculum companies saying that evidence for lower grades is just restating the, or reasoning is restating evidence. And that's not what it is. It's not restating evidence. It's talking about these concepts that we're making and these models that we're making and really being able to understand how that relates and talk about how that relates to what we see in the real world. Okay. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for McLearning with me. I've got a few more offers that I'd like to let you know about. And remember, like and subscribe. For each video on YouTube, I am making an interactive version using HP5. These will be for sale on Podia. And if you click on the link in the video, you should be able to go directly to that product. I also have 2 demos I'm going to be linking so you can kind of see what these products look like. So I would recommend checking out those demos. I also offer one-on-one remote tutoring through Wyzant. Please use the links that I have linked below. That way I can get 100% of the hourly rate as opposed to 75. Each video also has a link for my Patreon, and you can join at the $3 level to get some resources I use for tutoring or to support the channel. And I also have a $5 raffle level, which you could either get some free online tutoring or 5 interactive lessons for free. You choose which ones. And then I also have my Teachers Pay Teachers, which has some old lessons that I made from when I used to be a teacher. I may be adding to that. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope that you learned something.